Hello, welcome. Good afternoon. Thank you for being here with us today. We're recording live from suburban Philadelphia, Rosemont, which is not far from where I brought up my children in Villanova with Paul. And then my friend Jason is, we've just learned, moved to California. We're in Santa Monica. And so welcome everybody and thank you for being with us today. A little housekeeping for Zoom. We're all so familiar with it. We can't hear or see you, but you're most welcome to ask questions in the chat box or the Q&A, and please, as they come to mind, put them there and we'll get to as many as possible. We have a bunch of folks coming on today. I've had a long relationship with Jason, and he's regularly, as some of you have seen, brought very interesting companies to the community here to review. And so Xerothera, which I can actually speak Greek, but I can't read it anymore, is with us today, and we're grateful for Jason for bringing them here. So again, please feel free to ask questions as we go along, and we'll get to them. And then in the chat box of the Q&A. For the record, this is being recorded. And once edited, it's going to be posted to the Family Office Insights YouTube channel, and you can review it there. And as you see the presentation today, if anything comes to mind where others that you know would find it interesting to learn more, we're going to make sure everybody gets in touch directly with Paul and Jason. And so feel free to share it with others that you think will benefit from knowing more about what we're going to learn today. So with that, thank you again for being here. Paul, welcome.
It's my turn. Well, thank you, Art, for introducing here the company, Jason and myself. And I thought, getting started, my name is Paul Ducheyne, of course. I thought saying a few things about myself. I've been an academic my whole life. But that didn't mean that I didn't have an interest in industry, in taking concepts from my lab, especially, into the marketplace. Working on materials for use in medicine, and especially orthopedics, you really can't get to the ultimate of your profession unless you really see concepts used in patients. So here, this slide shows that back in the 90s, I founded Orthovita. I attracted the CEO, and it was the CEO, David Joseph, and myself who built the company. We went together on the road for the IPO. We did the roadshow, and then a few years later, Stryker acquired the company for $320 million. I've had that openness to working together with industry my whole career, as it also shows there towards the bottom. I've been a consultant to many of the companies here in this field. So what does Xerothera address? What is the problem? Well, we deal with a fearsome issue in orthopedic surgery. If there is infection in orthopedic surgery, then surgeons are extremely concerned about the quality of life of that patient. And actually, there's even a high mortality, as the slide says. The 5-year mortality rate after infection in elective surgery is higher than, for instance, the mortality for various cancers. So there's really a pressing medical issue, but not only is there a medical issue, there's also a major economic driver here for trying to eliminate infections. Namely, we live in the era of bundled payments for care. And if an infection occurs with orthopedic patients, then the hospital is responsible for all the costs. And so whereas a regular treatment without infection costs, let's say, X dollars, you typically get to 10 times, 15 times, 20 times more when infections take place. So how do we address that problem? We address that problem not with a drug, but with a biomaterial. On the left photograph, you see a particle, 4 microns. It's like powdery sugar. On the right, it shows the release of antibiotics from these particles. Now, I have to say a few words about this. The particle can absorb antibiotics at the time of surgery. So basically, we give the surgeon the flexibility to decide how to treat or how to prevent infection in every single patient at the time when he thinks about how to do the procedure and how to treat best the patient. Now, on this graph, there is release that is, let's say, near perfect. It's release of the yellow curve of vancomycin and the blue curve rifampin. And these are complementary antibiotics. Now, we've all heard about resistance infections and hospital infections. And so these are infections from which one can die. Vancomycin is typically the antibiotic that one uses, but it cannot kill off all the bacteria. And so what happens when you combine the two is that you really get a full bactericidal effect. Now, one point here, which is very important to keep in mind, we deal with the material, not with the drug. And when one does that, the time to market is significantly less than the time to market when one would develop a new drug. That has a number of very positive consequences in terms of developing the company, of course, and getting to the market. Good. The frequency of these infections that occur at surgery is very variable. It depends on the indication, depends on whether it's a joint replacement or the surgery is for taking care of trauma, or whether it's spinal surgery. Now, these numbers are all over the place, but if you just make a total assessment of the market size, you get to $5, $6, $7 billion. Underlying these numbers, and that's not shown in this slide, but there are patients that are at much greater risk than others. There are the comorbidities. Here, for instance, I can show the difference between infection and primary joint replacement, or when the prosthesis has to be removed and another one insert. It's already much higher. And so basically, surgeons are very concerned. They think very long and hard. They will do whatever they can in order to avoid this problem. Now, there's, of course, an effort at avoiding infection. And let's say the standard of care is using intravenous injection at the time of surgery, typically of vancomycin. But it is even when one uses this procedure that one gets these infection rates that I showed in the previous slide. Are there products out there that one tries to use? Yes, but they have fundamental problems. Yeah. Here, what this graph on the right shows is that when there is gentamicin and polymethyl metacolate in the bone cement, you'll get release at the time of surgery. And that's a good thing. There's nothing wrong with it. But it's only for less than a day, let's say, and then whatever still remains trickles out. So you don't have enough over that initial 2-3 weeks, which is the critical period to kill off everything. And two, the little quantity that escapes still elicits resistance infections. And we can talk about that, how that comes, but everything is concerned about that. There are a couple of other products, but they suffer from the same issues. Now, what's then the regulatory pathway that we have to follow with this biomaterial? Well, we need to get our clearance and approvals in a two-step process. First, a 510(k) clearance request for the material by itself. And our file at this time is with our regulatory attorney, and so that goes in another week or so. Our attorney is crossing the T's and dotting the I's. Subsequent to that, we need to show that if antibiotic is absorbed onto the material, doesn't change that beneficial behavior of the material. We call that in jargon a de novo application of the ancillary function of absorption of antibiotics. Basically, it's still a 510K, but now we can't compare it to predicate. Therefore, the FDA calls it a de novo application. Janice Hogan, a regulatory attorney, has excellent experience with that. And so while I talk about her, she's one of the best recognized regulatory attorneys in the country. She happens to be in Philadelphia, which is also a benefit. And I've known her for 10, 15, 20 years. Now, more about the process itself. The process for getting approval to get to the market is the same in the US as in Europe, same data. But in Europe, we also need to have a production facility in place before we can file. So that becomes an important goal here for us. We'll talk more about the production in another few slides. Now, the other points that I want to make being on this slide regarding regulation, in Europe, we also have an outstanding advisor. I learned from him after we had retained him that if he has complex questions for US products and US procedures, he consulted with Janice Hogan. Was nice to find out. And then so far, we have used less than $1 million to get to this point and compare that with market studies, like for instance here, the one that I reference, a market study done by Stanford Research Institute for the Medical Device Manufacturers Association, where one says a typical cost for getting there is 30 million. Now, here, timeline, filing, we get started, we are on the way here now with what the data that we need for our second filing. We also do experimentation that is very useful for launching our product. We are working on here a second filing, and then one needs all the data in one file sometime later. Now, as I indicated, we need to build out a production facility. GMP stands for good manufacturing practice. Yeah, and so we need to do it according to standards, and that takes some time to do it well, and then upscale the production, which we already have done in the first instance. So, and then we need to get in production. We need a facility for EC approvals. We also need it for then making product for going to the clinic and do a clinical study, and from there then launch in the US and then in Europe. What you see here on this slide is that there are plenty of events and activities. Each of them, when we conclude, represent a milestone. So in this timeline, there are plenty of milestone events. What it doesn't show is that as we progress, we'll also get into developing some other technologies, or other products, I should say, that are part and parcel of our technology platform. So in a nutshell, we focus on orthopedics, we focus on a product with short duration to market, we keep control of our know-how, a core technology we produce ourselves, but by producing, we can also get into relationships with the biotech industry and the device industry for making yet other products, and we have the wherewithal to actually do that and get into these relationships. Yep. So we'll leverage our patent portfolio, and in the end, notice that we'll be present both in the US and in Europe. Now, I want to emphasize this here. Zeraterra is a US company. We are not a European company, but we have the understanding of the difference between the two markets and the benefit for each of the markets and how to assist them by knowing the other market and achieving some advances in each of these regions or territories. Good. Market penetration. I've taken the more difficult case of out of US because markets are much less homogeneous in Europe than they are here. I use the word balkanized. And so it is important with orthopedic products to get to your key opinion leaders way before you actually have a product, and it is through the key opinion leaders and with them that you do clinical studies, that you make them comfortable with the product, and from there the word of mouth. And so in the first year upon launch, one doesn't go to every single hospital. The sale is different from an oncology drug, totally different. You go to your leaders and they will, so 10 hospitals, for instance, in the Netherlands, Germany, and Belgium, they have the number of cases that is shown. And so they will not treat or use the product in all of their patients. Now, orthopedics is very conservative. They take a wait and see attitude. Also the leaders. And so in the first year, you have a reasonable sale, you get started. But then as the product creates confidence on the basis of results and what they see with their eyes and ears and hands, then there's a gradual pickup at where you first started, and then you get to other accounts, you go more accounts per country, you go to other countries. And so out of US, market share in the first year is less than 0.1% and does not pick up very quickly. It is a long haul effort, but it goes continuously and steadily, and that's how you advance. And believe me, even with these numbers, there's a very healthy business that is being built. Now, exits in orthopedics, you have to be in the market. If you only have a technology, well, one will look at it, and you can talk with the major device companies, which are really companies based on the strength of marketing ability, marketing and sales ability. They will not really engage fully. And so it is important to be in the market, but once you are in the market, then one has options. We can think about acquisition. We know all the major players here in this slide, or we can have an asset acquisition, part of our assets, or we can partner and continue to build out our partnerships, or depending upon meeting a number of criteria, could even think about an IPO. We need to have sales revenues. We also need to have 1 or 2 other products that are in development and for which we reach development milestones. And it would be very useful also to have a partnership of several one of those. Comparables. In this field, the value of companies is very good, is excellent. So I've given here a few examples of values that are reached, that are achieved. The first example is one of a company, an orthopedic device company in Florida, that was public, but they were taken private by a private equity investor at a price to earnings ratio of 42. Once the announcement was made, the market pushed up that ratio to 48. Keep in mind that this company wasn't even a growth company. It was a company with a mature position in the market. Another company that I'm using here as an example is not in the orthopedics device sphere, but in devices. But it was acquired by Stryker, and Stryker was the company that acquired Orthovita. It's also one of the major players in orthopedics. And so the definite agreement for the acquisition priced the company at a trailing 12-month to EV sales ratio of 7.5, which again is very high. Third example, Pacira Pharmaceuticals is a company that spin out of Stanford. They got an approval for a pain control product. It was for general surgery applications and indications. But once they had their approval, 50% of their sales was off-label for orthopedics. Why was that? Because there is a major need for better pain control product for the pain of surgery in orthopedics as well. And so here, a tenfold increase over a couple of years, then there was a drop-off for reasons not related to the availability of Exparel. So major values are achieved in this field. Now, let's talk for a minute about the funds that we need to go forward, keep building the company, get it to the point of any of the possible exits or continuing as a going concern as a public company. Here, let me first point out the second major bullet. At this time, we have received a grant from the government of Belgium. It's a grant, it's not a loan, so it's capital that we don't have to return. It's non-dilutive capital, and it is more than $1 million in today's exchange rates. Now, we need to match this, not one-to-one, but we need to have about $600,000 to match here the 1.3 million. Now, think about what that means. Every dollar that is invested and is part of the $600,000 actually creates much more value in the company, because together with the 600,000, we get a 1.3 million into the company. And so we are at this point where we want to raise this capital as quickly as possible so that we can get started then with building out our GMP facility, for which we also have an agreement with a company that makes available pre-certified GMP space. What that means is we'll gain a year. We won't have to develop that space ourselves, and we will not have to pay people, and the lease fee is very reasonable. So here we want to move forward here with this grant as quickly as possible. And so we have a debt offering where we are in the process of raising up to $1 million, let's say, where each of the founders, that is myself and Dr. Guarino and Ed Wazinski, have already invested in addition to some other investments before. And we propose here to invest to accredited investors, and also some of the organizations to whom we presented a year or two successfully before, because we've reached that milestone of the regulatory submission. We'll also sit together with family investment offices, and that's then for another $1 million or so. We don't need too much here. It's clear that with the capital on this slide, we will not be done. As we go forward, we'll have other rounds, but anyone who comes in here is nicely positioned, because the debt will be converted under the conditions of the Series A later on, plus a 20% warrant, as we specified in the investment agreements. Now, the last bullet here on this slide is investors in the various debt rounds so far include plenty of leading orthopedic surgeons. So they know the need and they see the solution that we are working on, and they want to be part of it. Use of proceeds, nothing of the ordinary, just very regular things for a company at this stage of development. And let me emphasize here the GMP production, sorry for that. This is a slide I made a year or so ago, so it's something that one needs to do, and we are ready to move forward with this. Good. Management team. Jason Rifkin is also in on the Zoom call. We've known one another for 15 years. He was one of my best students ever in the technology transfer class at the University of Pennsylvania. And it showed then in the career that he has followed since. He has been in leading positions, including CEO positions in the biotech and the device sector. He and I work hand in glove, so to speak. Then there is the scientist here who has been, as a postdoc in Cambridge, also at an excellent materials research center in France. In terms of leading to production, we will rely on Frederik Vogeleisen, who has been in charge of production units for major pharmaceutical companies in Belgium. So managerially wise, she has the wherewithal. Also technically and scientifically, she has the right background, because the way we make xerosyn is with a polymers chemistry process. And that's her subject of her training at the time when she worked for her Ph.D. Last but not least, we also have product development. And so Charles Cohen here has done product development at two of the companies where he worked before. He actually also was one of my students eon years ago, something like that. He's a great guy, knows the transition between science and the market. Okay. Board and corporate summary. I already mentioned Jonathan Burino and Ed Wyszynski. A limited board gives us a great deal of flexibility going forward. Oh, again, Ceratera is a US company. We are incorporated in the state of Pennsylvania. The university has also some founder shares, but absolutely no anti-dilution clause. An amount I wanted to see much higher, but which I didn't accept. We also have options, a typical option pool. And as I said, we have worked with debt capital, and this debt is all convertible debt that will also convert at the time of the Series A. We got some money from the state of Pennsylvania. I think I'm coming close to my last slide, if I'm not mistaken. And so let me sum up some of the reasons why you may want to consider investing in Ceratera. We deal with an unsolved problem, and the market is major. Now, once we start with a particular indication, surgeons, orthopedic surgeons, being who they are, will see other indications. And each time when we talked to them, they gave us ideas about other products. And so expansion of indications is easily possible. We've got extensive proof of concept data. I didn't show any, can't show you everything, but we have a database, an extensive database of data. We've got excellent IP. I didn't discuss that either, but we get our patents. We've got platform technology, so upon which we really can build a good company. There's the possibility of different types of revenue stream. We've got strong science and technology whereby we can get into partnerships, both strategic partnerships as well as technology partnerships. We are attractive to European partners, and that's already clear in the grant that we get. There are plenty of different ways of skinning a cat here once it comes to monetizing the investment. There are favorable comparables in this field, and the people, me plus the people who I bring in are really experienced and know how to build a company from where we are to the next step up and beyond. I believe that's my last slide. Yes, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We are here for trying to answer your questions.
But Jason, you want to make a comment, or you want to wait till I ask a couple questions?
My only comment is I've known Paul for a number of years, and I was always taken by his approach, his research, his science, and this goes back 15 years. And it's one of the reasons I wanted to get him in front of you, Arthur, in this audience, because he is a successful serial entrepreneur that brings invents products and then brings them all the way through the process. And taking a company public based on a material that he's invented in his lab is no small thing. And he's done that successfully, and he's doing it again here. So this is one of those opportunities that I think is extraordinarily exciting. It's early, and one of the biggest positive attributes here is that the investors right now consist many of leading orthopedic surgeons, those that will be using this product in a very short term, right? This is not a drug. This is a device. It's a biomaterial. It's regulated very differently. Paul touched on this. And I think one of the reasons these investors jump in early is because they know this is not a 10 or 20-year process to actual use in a clinical setting. It's much shorter. And that's when I invest, but also when I jump in and support companies and help folks like Paul, that's exactly what I look for. It's people and it's investors. So this is a very exciting opportunity at just the right time. I think it's being presented here, considering this matching grant, which was touched upon. But that's every dollar that's invested privately is equivalent to over a 3x. That's something for a company this size during this capital raise.
Yeah, non-dilutive. Let's take a couple questions. You guys are probably going to be able to interpret this better, but I'll just say it so everybody hears it. Aren't PJL or PJI rates currently declining in the developed world into the 0.50 to the 0.75% range? A third of what there used to be. I think their price to earnings is what he meant on comps.
Jason.
PJI is referring more to joint infection. Is there a way to unmute so that it looks like Dr. Campbell?
Not really. A post-joint infection. Okay, there we go.
So the question, Paul, is Dr. Campbell is stating that his understanding is that joint infection, post surgery joint infections are actually declining over the past number of years. Projects a 7,500 a year in the U.S., which is 10% of the 1 million, I'm assuming, joint surgeries in the U.S. that would get this product. Yeah. So I think the comment is, Paul, really more towards the market opportunity, the growth of this market, right, and the unmet need.
Yeah, sure. Surgeons do whatever they can in order to avoid infections. There is no doubt about it. Now, if we just take the 1% in that slide 3 or 4, let's go back to that very quickly. Yeah, that 1% is an average. There are surgeons who dare to brag, say we don't have any infection. There are other hospitals where the infections are much higher than 1%. So these are the averages. What is masked by these averages is that there are plenty of patients at risk. There are patients with comorbidities, plenty of comorbidities where the risk is much higher. Yeah. So here, 1% of 450,000 is 4.5, and that can go down. But here, so many patients have received joint prosthesis, and the number of revisions will only go up. And with revisions, the risk becomes higher because of the type of tissue you have at the interface. So that's one of the, here, the comorbidities is one consideration. 2 is the revision cases. 3 is trauma, where you have major variations, yeah? And it depends upon the extent of the trauma. It also depends upon how the surgery is performed. And so if the number here that you mentioned, that Dr. Campbell mentioned regarding primary cases is about right, I don't have any problem with that. There is much more regarding infection, and we need to say then talking about these primary cases. So many orthopedic surgeons here, and 50% of our investors at this time really see the need because they experience the need. Yeah.
Oftentimes when I see these things, which is not that often and not knee deep like you folks, but I see a promising amount of them getting non-dilutive grants from the NIH. Is there hope for that here as well?
We work on an SBIR grant for our second product, which is a pain control product. Here, I think we are somewhat too far in order to apply for an SBIR. At the time, I've thought about going to BARDA, but BARDA really deals more with the biological solutions, with the modifications of the antibiotics or new antibiotics. And I wasn't really sure that I would have a good audience to talk about a better delivery, making sure more stays in the tissue, because then you have a missionary task, so to speak. You first have to convert biologists into thinking materials. And so I didn't spend my time on that. Yeah, okay.
So Jason, what you said earlier, and I know we talked about it, but can you just highlight the time difference between the medical device filing and going to market and otherwise?
Well, so a drug filing, I always say, from invention to approval can be 10 years plus. There are obviously some shortcuts, but there's quite a bit more work to be done. This is not a drug. This is a biomaterial that is essentially loaded with something that has already been approved, that is generally a generic. It's an antibiotic, and it can be your choice of antibiotics. So this is a true device with a much shorter, a few years, if that, type of timeline.
So
Paul can
it's
chime in more
dramatically
specific.
shorter.
Oh,
I just wanted to be clear about that. Yeah.
It's a very different regulatory path. It's a very different agency within the FDA. Paul, did you want to chime in further in terms of our specific timelines on our filings?
No, you did that well, Jason. When it comes to the FDA, you have to show safety and efficacy. And so as far as the material is concerned, it is absolutely safe. It's as good as anything that is currently being used in surgery. Then when we add antibiotics to it, it doesn't change the safety profile. What we will have to measure, though, is how much antibiotic gets into the patient. Yeah, that's the only safety question that can be asked. Yeah, because these very potent antibiotics are toxic if they are present at too high concentration for too long. But with all the animal data that we have, there's a very steady, reasonable release that we can measure it locally around the particles or around the soil gel products or so, but we can't measure it in plasma. So there's never really a high concentration. And the material is gone in 2-3 weeks. And so that by itself is also sufficient for not having any problems. So the material then is combined with antibiotics that is already accepted. So we don't have to file for a new drug application, which leads to the durations that Jason mentioned, up to 10 years. I wouldn't say here in this case would be 10 years, would be more like 7-8 years. So we shave off at least 3 years from that whole process.
All right, so you don't have to go back to the slide, but from today until how soon do you have to fund the matching grant?
I have not asked the question. I don't think it's much longer than 4 to 6 months.
Okay, so that's important.
Oh yeah,
for the audience to.
We like to keep moving with the company, and so this is now an important task. Yeah. It takes some time to set up the production, test it, file the paperwork, get the approvals, and so forth.
So sooner than later, right? Because that window
Right.
will close eventually.
Yeah.
And how far along are you with that?
With what? With setting up the production?
No. How's so far in this raise to match those?
Oh, okay. With race, we are about halfway of the 1 million.
All right, that's good to hear. Okay. And the types of people, you don't have to say who they are, but the one half is largely the doctors that see the wisdom in what you're doing.
So the founders and a couple of doctors.
Great. Okay. We think we have another question here. Okay, a compelling piece of your story would be outcome data of using your product. Hang on. Actually leads to decreased cost of diagnosis, admission, revision, and following patients with suspected post-joint infections, which is very expensive and challenging job for clinicians. The C-suites who are value conscious will get it if you can link to utilization data.
It sounds like Dr. Campbell may be an orthopedic surgeon, but
Yeah,
that's
right.
just a guess on this one. And
Yeah, right,
I
probably
think
good guess. Yeah.
I think your points are spot on. And I know Paul, and when a development program is in full play, we'll grab that data, even post-market surveillance. But I think what's key here, and that probably answers your question that I think you asked, Arthur, was the types of investors. It's orthopedic surgeons are super interested in this and have in fact put their money where the need is, so to speak. This is not a company that's gone out yet to institutional investors, which is one of the reasons I thought this was a good format for this small round of capital.
Yeah.
And then strategic partnerships, right, with so many different types of companies for any type of eventual round is almost a no-brainer, in that this is a biomaterial and not a drug, but it can be used with a variety of different drugs. So I think the opportunity for non-dilutive type of funding down the road in the form of rights or royalties or something to that effect could end up being something very real.
Jason, let me add a
Please.
piece of information that we have not really discussed in a major way. One of the directors, Ed Wazinski, is also a member of the board of overseers or board of trustees of a hospital, not an academic hospital, but it is in the New York region. And so the chief medical officer and I conducted an analysis of the cost and the benefit to their particular hospital if they were to use Zerocin. And so he had all the infection rates in his hospital, and he made an analysis of the cost today, so to speak, without using Zerocin and getting the infections and knowing what it costs to treat these infections, and that this cost then is at the expense of the hospital itself, or in the other arm of the analysis, having Zerocin and minimizing the infection rates. With that analysis, the total expense to the hospital came to about the same on either side of the ledger. Now, you may think, so therefore there's no incentive for changing. Then think about the medical benefit, which is really, really major. There's major morbidity associated with these infections and mortality, as I indicated. So there is perhaps in this analysis not a compelling case yet economically, but then you have to add the medical need that is really, really major. Now, you don't know the market till when you are in the market. And so what Dr. Guarino always emphasizes is that half of our patients are at-risk patients sometimes. And so there will be hospitals where they have a major number of at-risk patients. And there it is then almost a given that in case, yes, really reduce the infection rate significantly, that they will adapt this product here. Now, we have plenty of evidence from the scientific, medical, clinical literature that with local release, you get in the very difficult trauma cases where you have 30%, 40% of infection sometimes, that with local release, you get a significant improvement. Yeah, there are products out there that have local release. If you use such a product, you already get an improvement. So our product releases locally, but doesn't release locally for one day, but releases for an extended, the 3 weeks that are really critical.
Yeah, from a very pedestrian view, it's like slow release drugs, right?
Yeah,
as opposed to, yeah.
Think about Claritin, that's one day,
Yeah.
but here we have 3 weeks, and 3 weeks is what we need.
Yeah. So the part of that study, I get it, the economics were a push, but isn't there quality of life issues?
Oh, yeah, that's what, sorry for using jargon words.
Yeah.
That's when I talk about morbidity. Yes,
Right.
absolutely. Yeah, but if I would use other words, yes, that's absolutely what it is. And it is, and it quality of, well, it's absence of quality of life.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
Yeah.
We had a friend for elective surgery, replacement of the hip. She got infected. It's dreadful.
Yeah. I'm
At
sure
the
it's
age of
stressful.
60, one still has the remaining life expectancy of 25 years.
Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine. Can only imagine. Yeah. So Dr. Campbell says, thank you for your hard work. And I want to thank you for sharing this with us. It's definitely an arcane subject to me, but you guys did a great job of clarifying the opportunity. You want to close up with a closing remark?
Me, Jason, you are good at doing these things. I gave the meat of the story, so you put little balloons around it now.
No, I think the closing remarks would really highlight what I've already said. I think this is probably a different type of opportunity than's often presented here, in that the company is not seeking all that much funding, but it's seeking knowledgeable investors that are interested in this space, that realize that there's a number of bells and whistles attached to this round that materialized over the past few months, which really was why I thought this was interesting. It's not often you see a US company with matching funds coming in, a clear strategic direction for its lead product with two, I wouldn't even call them backup products. They're two products using very similar technology out of Paul's lab, with short timelines to commercial realization. And then, as you know, Arthur, I enjoy working with founders and inventors. And one of the key pieces to a story that I need to see is having someone so involved that they put everything they've got into it. And this is what Paul has done over and over again with multiple successes. And I think most interestingly, building OrthoVita from something so small, just like this, to a clear strategic target that did in fact close into a very large return for investors. That's the type of track record you want. And he's done a wonderful job surrounding himself with extraordinarily smart members of his team and board. So I feel privileged to be able to work with Paul on this, and I'm sure the story resonates. And if there are any other questions, feel free. I know the contact information will be distributed. We can follow up as needed.
Yep, super, super interesting and compelling. Thank you for sharing it with me. As Jason is always grateful for your bringing these interesting opportunities to the community, and I super appreciate it, and I know they do. So with that, like I said, we're going to make sure everybody gets in touch with the folks here, and if there's anybody in your community after hearing what you saw today that would care to know more, then you're welcome to connect with Jason directly or Paul, and we'll make sure we can make that happen. So with that, thank you for you folks, Paul, Jason, and thank you for everybody that's on the call for sharing with us the only thing you can't make more of, and that's your time. Till next time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
ladies and gentlemen, for your attention here and taking out the time to listen to this story. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks, guys.
Take care now. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.